Hello guys and gals, and welcome back to another episode of Creepypastas. Yes, Creepypastas. This time we're returning back to the land of lost episodes, and covering quite a famous lost episode of Creepypasta called Ed, and Eddy Lost Episode. So with that being said, let's dive right in and read this Creepypasta. As you may know, the popular show Ed, and Eddy had been running for a long time. However, between October 7, 2003 and October 21st, 2003, Episode 34 was accidentally released 1 week before it was scheduled to. It was also known to some around the office the primary writer had been sick with the flu, and instead of going on to make Episode 34, the show was supposed to replay the first episode. At 5 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, people reported a very disturbing new episode premiering on Cartoon Network. Some children were fortunate enough to see it. Apparently the quality of the episode was mediocre when held to the regular standards. Animation was choppy, sound was constricted and very muffled. Reports of a line running up and down, similar to a crappy VHS tape, were received. Scenery was described as overwhelmingly dark and depressing without changing props and other background objects. Stormy looking. Characters also behaved oddly. Instead of the normal goofy hijinks-inspired personalities, viewers complained that they seemed extremely agitated, gratuitously hateful towards each other, and constantly about to begin sobbing after the lines. The protagonist also had a very bad lisp. No one knows why, but he spoke with a sexual tone, and that further bothered the viewers. I was one of the viewers. The episode began with Eddy walking down the street with Ed. I noted that Double D was missing. There was an angular shot coming from in front of the two to show them walking towards the viewer. Eddy, was wearing the angry look he does when something goes wrong. His eyes were red around the iris. Ed looked absolutely forlorn and practically dragged behind Eddy, tears in his eyes, which were both lazy and looking in opposite outward directions. Kevin, the series antagonist, was riding his bike opposite of the Ed's towards him. The shot became blurry and low moans were heard coming from Eddy before Kevin hit him, which never happened because the screen always went to black. The screen then snapped back and Kevin was again headed towards Eddy. The view was so blurry this time, all I saw was a green blob headed towards a yellow one. Again, the low moan, only this time it sounded like the microphone was broken and loud static came, greatly overshadowing the moan. A claymation sequence of Double D sleeping in Eddy's bed came up. Honestly, it may have just been the abruptness, but I jumped and shivered. Waking up and getting out of bed, he moved oddly around the circular room, the fast pitter-patter of footsteps being the only audio. The step sounds were very clear as I was shown a bird's-eye view of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Double D began screeching, sounded like a fisher cat, as he moved wildly around the cell of the room faster and faster until the screen began blurring again, the purple room's color swallowing a now orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddy's front door sat. An absolute silence for a maddeningly long time. At least 2 minutes of dead silence in a door. Next we see Jimmy and Sarah at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. Jimmy, obstructed in view by a hanging lamp, is crying loudly with Sarah trying to comfort him in an unusually warm fashion. "It hurts, Sarah, it hurts." Suddenly, the door of the room smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't showing because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room. Jimmy was shown. His headgear was mangled. The front bent upward, stretching his lip very high to tearing proportions. The front of his gums were trickling blood, and teeth were missing. The disturbing part was he had lost both arms and legs before and apparently, and sat a paraplegic. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion the others had beaten him up and bent his headgear. The camera stayed on his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Commercials came on. We were instantly assaulted with a very hairy Rolf in a darkened shed fisting the cow repeatedly. The visual loops and gets blurry again as the scene pans out. Naz is reading a magazine on her couch. The quality is now perfect. Eddy is now alone without Ed. The quality declines worse than before as he is still waking. The sun now lightening the mood somewhat as he smiles and begins running. The door is shown again and we see through Eddy's eyes as he reaches out and opens it. The house is nice and bright, but a very badly played violin is blaring, the only audio in the scene as he makes his way through the house. Eddy opens the door to his room. Johnny is shown under Naz's couch cushion as he crawls out on all fours in a comedic way and pops up behind her, still oblivious. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes, and I thought of a mole. Suddenly I stopped laughing and he started swallowing her head, still in cartoonish fashion of course, but this was different. He and she stayed like this until she started kicking and struggling. Johnny held her like this until she went limp. A zoom in on his face revealed extremely small human eyes. Double D was laying on Eddy's floor, no longer in claymation. The camera showed Eddy's house for the remainder of the episode, about 3 minutes, and the next program began on the spot. Well then, how was that? This is one of those lost episode creepypastas, and this is a pretty famous one if that, but, what do I think about it? Well, if I decide to go off imagery alone, it's one of the most fucked up things to watch, right after Squidward's suicide and Dead Bart and whatnot. Imagine being a kid up at 5 in the morning, yes, it could happen, personal experiences prove it, and watching this episode, it could really kind of fuck up someone that young. I mean, with it being so well detailed, I could really picture it in my head, and the imagery, especially with Johnny at the end, fucking eating and swallowing things, and, it kind of makes it in my eyes. Now, the problem with this one for me is that despite it being very well detailed, with all the imagery and whatnot, it sort of lacked build-up, because unlike Squidward's suicide and Dead Bart, those tales were longer, and they just kept filling in more detail. It seems like, this is a tale that just kind of came and went. It was good and all, but it came and went. So if it had been a little spaced out, maybe filled in some of the extra details on the runtime, what was going on in there, even more imagery than what we already had, and just, went even like minute by minute, I guess, and whatnot, it would have been even better. I mean, don't just throw in details to make it better, but I feel like if it was like spaced out and I guess even better structured, then it would just be it would be like on a whole nother league, kind of. But all in all, in the end, it definitely did spark interest, and it kept me reading all the way through. I wasn't bored, and it, although I wanted it to be a tad more spaced out, structured out a little better, it was ultimately nice and definitely provided some awesome imagery. With that being said, what would you rate this, and what would you change to make it better? This has been another episode of Creepypastas, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.